Hey there, first grade readers. Today, we're going to begin another story called The Relatives Came. The words in the story were written by Cynthia Rylant, and the pictures were illustrated by Stephen Camel, and he used color pencils to create all these pictures. I want you to think about this word, relatives. Do you know what a relative is? A relative relatives are people such as cousins, uncles, aunts, grandparents, brothers, sisters, moms, and dads. Can you think of a relative who does not live with you? What do you call them? A relative that does not live with me is my grandma. Her name is Mona, and I call her Grandma Mona, but Griffin, since it's his great-grandma, he calls her Nana. Let's think about this title, The Relatives Came. What does the title tell you about what might happen? Maybe the relatives are coming to visit. Let's watch and listen to what happens in our story. The Relatives Came, story by Cynthia Rylant, illustrated by Stephen Gamble. It was in the summer of the year when the relatives came. They came up from Virginia. They left when their grapes were nearly purple enough to pick, but not quite. They had an old station wagon that smelled like a real car, and in it they put an ice chest full of soda pop and some boxes of crackers and some bologna sandwiches. And they came up from Virginia. They left at 4 in the morning when it was still dark, before even the birds were awake. What does this tell you about the relatives? It tells you that they're going on a long trip and they are preparing by packing snacks and lunch and leaving so early. Look at the car in the picture. What do you notice? Yeah, we see some things flying off and it's bouncing down the road. They drove all day long and into the night. And while they traveled along, they looked at the strange houses and different mountains, and they thought about their almost purple grapes back home. They thought about Virginia, but they thought about us too, waiting for them. So they drank up all their pop and ate all their crackers and traveled up all those miles until finally they pulled into our yard. Then it was hugging time. Talk about hugging. Those relatives just passed all of us around their car, pulling us against their wrinkled Virginia clothes, crying sometimes. They hugged us for hours. Then it was into the house, and so much laughing and shining faces and hugging in the doorways. You'd have to go through at least 4 different hugs to get from the kitchen to the front door. Those relatives. And finally, after a big supper, 2 or 3 times around until we all got a turn at the table, there was quiet talk. Excuse me. There was quiet talk, and we were in 2s and 3s throughout the house. The relatives weren't particular about beds, which was good since there weren't any extras. So a few squeezed in with us, and the rest slept on the floor, some with their arms thrown over the closest person, or some with an arm across one person and a leg across another. It was different, going to sleep with all the new breathing in the house. The relatives stayed for weeks and weeks. They helped us tend the garden, and they fixed any broken things that they could find. Look at the children in the picture. What are some of the things the children are doing with the adults? Yeah, we see a child getting its hair cut. Another one's getting a ride on the back of, looks like a grandpa. Here, they're fixing a car. They're playing with cars here. They're tending the garden. Looks like they're playing dress up. Lots of stuff going on. They ate up all our strawberries and melons, then promised we could eat up all their grapes and peaches when we came to Virginia. But none of us thought about Virginia much. We were so busy hugging and eating and breathing together. Finally, after a long time, the relatives loaded up their ice chest and headed back to Virginia at 4 in the morning. We stood there in our pajamas and waved them off in the dark. We watched the relatives disappear down the road. Then we crawled back into our beds that felt too big and too quiet. We fell asleep. And the relatives drove on all day long and into the night. And while they traveled along, they looked at strange houses in different mountains, and they thought about their dark purple grapes waiting at home in Virginia. But they thought about us too, missing them, and they missed us. And when they were finally home in Virginia, they crawled into their silent, soft beds and dreamed about next summer. Why do you think they put grapes on the last page? Because they talked about the grapes that they grew in Virginia. Let's think about this book. Have you ever had relatives come to your house before? Or have you gone to visit relatives that live far away before? How is that like the book? Wow. So friends, I have family that lives in Chicago. And when we were little, me and my sisters, my mom and dad, we would all load up in our van and leave early in the morning, just like the relatives, and drive to Chicago and stay in my great-grandma and grandpa's house that was so small, kind of like here, where we filled up the beds and we slept on the floor. But those were always my favorite times to visit. There is no response today. I want you to think about your relatives and your visits with your relatives and how they make you feel. Be sure to tell your relatives how much you love them and how they make you feel. See you later, friends.